Well, we're delighted to be here performing for you again. We touched on last month's pre-concert talk. We touched on playing the Schubert Quintet and how collaborating with different cellists was always an interesting thing. And so we wanted to talk a little bit more about the various collaborations this time. Obviously, Craig, we're delighted that he's come and joined us for this Boccerhini Quintet. Perhaps we could talk about that quintet as well. Because collaborating with other musicians can always sort of lead to interesting things happening, and interesting projects and inspirations, sometimes more inspiring than others, different occasions. And I know, Craig, you've done quite a lot over the years of different collaborations.
Well, the guitar, it occupies, as a solo instrument, obviously it was made increasingly, or the profile of the guitar as a solo instrument increased through the 20th century, initially through Andre Segovia and then John Williams and Julian Bream. They were really the big global names through the 20th century. But the repertoire and the opportunities to play as a soloist aren't enough for anyone really to sustain a career without working in chamber music. So I've always tried to make myself busy, because I came to the UK from Australia with the intention of trying to forge a career as a player, and even now, with the lucky sort of boost of profile I've had on Classic FM over the last 5 years, there's still not enough opportunities to play solo, to be busy and make a living. So it's an extremely pleasant, delightful necessity to have to work with other people. So, especially today, it's so obvious it goes without saying. But my regular duos, I will let you say something again. I'm not going to talk the entire half. Just tell me to shut up. So as a guitarist, my regular duos have been various strings, but violin, cello, flute, mandolin, percussion, saxophone, lots of different voices, and then on to bigger groups, violin, cello and guitar, flute, clarinet and guitar, and string quartets and every other sort of combination you can imagine. It pops up in contemporary groups. Before you get to the stage where you're playing concertos with orchestras, there are a couple of key bits of repertoire, like some Webern that has guitar, little orchestral pieces that have in. There's a Mahler 7, I think. The third movement has mandolin and guitar. So after my 2 postgrad years at the Royal Northern, I did manage to find work in the orchestra as guitarist with the BBC Phil, the Halle, the Manchester Camerata and the Royal Liverpool Phil. And then, so, they knew me as a musician who would turn up on time, be prepared, and I was able to count and follow a conductor, which aren't skills often attributed to guitarists. And and I'm not dissing guitarists, I was incredibly lucky to have percussion as my second instrument for a long time, from the age of 13 in Perth. And Perth is so isolated, and there were so few percussionists there when I was in my late teens, that I had some work, professional work, with the WA Symphony Orchestra and the other orchestra that accompanied the ballet and the opera. So I had a lot of experience playing orchestral percussion, which meant I could sell myself to orchestras, ensembles, as a guitarist who could count, watch, follow, listen, and turn up on time. So
what you're telling us is you should really be the one playing the castanets today.
Oh, no, I would definitely not steal the limelight.
Because we have played with a few guitarists, and we have noticed that often guitarists will have, I guess because they do spend a lot of time playing by themselves, maybe, but they do have, not necessarily, they can be very rhythmic, but their rhythmic sense is almost in their own world.
Whereas, that was so tactful. Early days, when I was, harassing everybody as one does, I went to see the Scottish Chamber Orchestra and speak to their management and just introduce myself. And they were still sort of emotionally scarred from a tour with a guitarist, and they wouldn't tell me who it was, but apparently it was just agony. And like you say, that perhaps a good sense of rhythm, but rather sort of their own sense of rhythm, as it were. And honestly, they had no intention of working with another guitarist anytime soon, because that experience was so difficult. So, it's not a lack of ability, it's a lack of opportunity to follow a conductor and be made to listen. And when you're playing percussion, you're just hitting something, and, you know, in a really oversimplified sense, it's just, you know, watching, hitting, being on time. There's no blending. Once you've hit it, you can't take it back. Obviously, strings and winds, you can blend the sound a little bit. My favourite little, I will let you talk again, but my favourite little, my personal favourite mistake that I made playing percussion, and it's quite theatrical. You stand up, you hold your instrument up. It was just playing triangle, and there was one beautifully delicate little crowning moment, just a little ting, at some most glorious moment. I can't even remember what the piece was. But I stood up and I held it up, and, you know, when you do that, because you're the only thing sort of moving around, you feel the audience's eyes are on you. And I went like, and triangle cuts through, like, it's incredible. A well-played triangle can cut through a whole orchestra, believe it or not. There's real art to this. It's basically a bit of metal, but anyway. And this moment, it's pianissimo, and you just have to touch it with the tip of the beater, and they're slightly unwieldy, and if it's too loud, it ruins the moment. It really is exquisite. So I stood up, and at the moment, I went, and I missed. And I thought, what the hell do I now? I can't go back, that moment's gone. So I just pretended, I went... drifted away. I pretended it was sort of quadruple P rather than just pianissimo. Sorry, carry on. It's not all about me.
Because we were talking about actually doing those extra things, and increasingly as a string quartet we kind of get asked to do things like Craig was talking about. One of the pieces we've been doing a little bit, and we're doing next year again, is a piece by a Chinese-American composer, Huang Ro, who's written us a piece, and we knew it was going to be a string quartet piece, and it was for us to play at Carnegie Hall. But then he said to us, well, you're going to need 4 sets of Tibetan finger cymbals as well. And they make a great sound, but the same thing actually, though, if you miss it, it's a bit embarrassing, because they're very visual.
Ceremony about it.
Yeah, you sort of make a very ceremonial movement. And so we did it.
I think in the first movement, I have the very last ting, and I had exactly the same experience as Craig in one of the performances where I went, and I was about, I'd say, a centimetre away, but it just, you either hit it or you don't.
Also, you had, with that in the second movement, you have to bow the bell, which is actually, it makes the most extraordinary sound, really noisy, but it's actually really hard to do, and I swear I practiced that far more than I practiced the notes that I had to play, because it's taking you out of your comfort zone, and that's what happens with a lot of collaborations, and actually that's quite often where the magic happens. But we've collaborated with Wajahat Khan, who's a sarod player, and there's this bit, I don't know why it's the second violin, but you just said the second violin.
I know why it's the second violin. I was told the story behind it, yeah. Well, it was the Medici Quartet, I think, who first performed this piece. And Wajahat had written the piece in his head, but he needed someone to notate it. So it was notated, and then they worked for a very long time together. And then he said, okay, there's this bit where we're going to, with the first violin, we're going to have a bit of a kind of a game where I'll play a note, he plays the note, then I'll play something else, and we bounce off each other. And apparently the first violinist said, I'm not doing it. So that's why the second violinist did it.
Yeah, so by the time we got to play
it, because obviously he's not a sort of formally trained musician, it's a traditional instrument, and it's all by ear and by feel, and he feels it, but we didn't really feel it the same way he did. So he would start, and then, it's very difficult when you're brought up, to play the notes on the page, to suddenly not play any notes on any page, and
and what was really interesting,
he get faster and faster, and
when we were learning the piece as well, he often demonstrated what he wanted us to sound like by singing it rather than by playing it actually, and it's sometimes very, very difficult to try and replicate a traditional singing voice on on classical string instruments. You know, it's quite a challenge.
So I remember reading, Craig, about your collaboration with an electric guitarist.
Yes. My career has been built on a never say no policy, which has generally worked out well, but partially because of that, I was approached by a young Norwegian metal guitarist. So she plays a 7-string electric guitar, and heavy metal has been her world. But she'd done one sort of classical crossover thing, and she wanted to do some more. And so I agreed to do this. We recorded an album, we made some videos, and so her real name is Berit Hagen, but her stage name is the Commander-in-Chief. And she has the attire to go with the Commander-in-Chief sort of image. So it's very striking, one might say. And compared to me, classical guitarist, it's hysterically chalk and cheese. So if you have access to YouTube, it's worth Googling the Commander-in-Chief Paganini, or my name, that will get you there. There are 4 videos shot in various places in and around Oslo. And it was mad, basically, but fun. It's hard to describe until you've quite seen it. But it's she's playing her electric metal guitar, not with a distorted sound, with a clean electric sound, and I'm playing my classical guitar. But we play some sort of core classical pieces, plus one tango, and a bunch of other things on the album. But that was definitely my most unusual collaboration, and also the most popular on YouTube. So, unsurprisingly.
You went to a prison with her, is that right?
Well, yes, I did.
To a prison, not to prison.
Not as a result of crime against music. We rehearsed a lot together. We recorded this album. She lives in the UK, but she's Norwegian, so we recorded in Norway and made the videos in Oslo. And then her manager, who also happens to be her mum, was looking for some opportunities for us to play live. And the prison system in Norway, should you find yourself going to prison, Norway is a good place to do it, is very, very forward-thinking and very much based around rehabilitation. There's a very famous prison there called Halden Prison, which, if you Google it, you'll find lots of information. It's one of the most rehabilitative and enlightened sort of prisons in the world. And it's a maximum security men's prison. And so when they'd advertised our gig as, Commander-in-Chief, as metal guitarist, I don't think they were that pleased to see me, to be honest, or to hear, classical music. But they listened attentively. But it's a maximum security prison, so all the sort of worst kinds of things. But it is very rehabilitative, and it was fascinating to see. They do musicals, all sorts of art, and woodwork and everything else. They have their own. They've published a cookery book, and they have their own record label called, wonderfully, and I have the mug, called Criminal Records. So yes, it was an experience, and life is all about experiences. So all of this work was done on the premise that we would tour successfully and everything else, but actually apart from the prison gig, which I did get paid for, the 6 days of recording, all the rehearsals, everything else, the videos, I didn't see a penny. And that's, you throw yourselves at these projects in the hope that they might be enjoyable and enable you to earn a living. But that one was enjoyable but didn't facilitate the living, unfortunately. But that's the way it goes.
Shall we say a little bit about the Boccerhini Quintet?
The one we're playing.
That's why we're here today.
Yeah.
Because when we played the Schubert Cello Quintet last month, we said, there are hardly any, in a way, quintets written with 2 cellos. But we sort of glossed over the fact that Boccherini wrote about 115. And actually, this quintet, the guitar quintet, is based on a lot of that string quintet repertoire. So it wasn't, I don't think, originally conceived as a guitar quintet, but then he rearranged it in a group, made a group of 6 guitar quintets towards the end of his life, actually.
Yeah.
But he was quite an unusual composer in many ways. And
yeah, I mean, I think that the starting point for Boccerhini is that he was such a virtuoso, I mean, incredible at the cello, and I think something as all cellists know, that it's fiendishly difficult playing Boccerhini because he'd just write things that he found very simple to throw off himself. And he was quite often found playing, if a first violinist was sick in the orchestra he played in, he'd just step in and play at pitch, just the first violin part, just like that, because he had that amazing facility. And I think something that's quite often forgotten, because his chamber music is quite neglected. I mean, he wrote nearly 100 string quartets. We've never played them, and they're not considered in the same vein as Haydn. But one thing that he did do was he really advanced the way that parts were written for the cello. And actually his quartet, he formed a quartet with his friends, and they were one of the first known quartets to actually travel around performing concerts as a quartet. And I think that's why he wrote such a huge amount of quartets. And then when he moved to Madrid, there was already a quartet there. So I think that's where the cello quintets came for, because he wanted to join in. And so a lot of the writing is incredibly hard. And
also moving to Madrid, it sort of took him out of that mainstream, you know, if you're away from Haydn and the Austrian and the German tradition, and moved him to a different, you know, a whole different musical sphere, in a sense. And that's probably why we get the guitar in this quintet, and, you know, the Fandango, which, you know, is an incredible kind of characterful dance. But if he hadn't gone to Madrid and lived there, perhaps those influences might not have come in.
Yeah, and seeped in. And I think that one thing that you'll notice straight away in this guitar quintet is the first movement, particularly. The cello is just playing ridiculously high, and I'm sure he would have... There aren't really any known performances of the work until kind of the 1920s, but I'm sure there would have been the occasion where he first wrote it that he would have played. I mean, it was a patron who was an amateur guitarist. You can imagine that Boccerhini would have just played along and gone, yeah, I'm going to give myself a good part for this. But certainly performing it is very different. Playing with a guitarist, the texture is so different for us to play. I mean, we've done it with different guitarists. Some use amplification, some don't, and automatically that changes how we put it together.
Because Craig, you use a sort of subtle...
I do have a little, it's just a little German-made amplifier, which there's nothing on it to do anything other than replicate the sound of the guitar that plugs into it. It doesn't have any reverb or anything like that. It's supposed to be just literally an enhanced or just enlarged version of the sound of the guitar. And for that particular one, it's made by a guy called Stefan Schlemper. And if you want to buy one, you have to go there so he can sort of EQ it for your own type of guitar, so that the sound is replicated as faithfully as possible. And personally for me, if you do this without amplification, then I play triple forte all the time, and you don't really get to hear the guitar very much at all. And the quartet have to play quietly enough that it will affect...
It affects the character
the character of the piece and the way they play, and it will just pull back some of the dynamism of the music itself. So regardless of authenticity, I mean, I can't believe the guitar was ever really heard. It's basically an accompaniment part with a few little melodic lines to play and sort of accompanied melody bits to play. So it is textural. You're not meant to hear every single note, but you are meant to hear some of them. So I would rather, as tactfully and faithfully and cleanly as I can, amplify, so that these guys can play naturally in their comfortable dynamic range, and you get to hear this texture, than for me to sit here bashing away like mad and for it to be inaudible.
I think what's interesting as well is because we played this piece and a lot of other quintets and things like that with wind or whatever, with sometimes the added player sitting out there. But I think actually coming in here, it really feels that the guitar is a core foundation of the whole sound, and that it's really integrated.
Which very much goes with the guitar's role in the whole quintet.
Yeah. And in the Fandango movement is when we will see the cameo from the the castanets from Emma as well. So
yeah, you see, this is another thing. When I was at music college, I never thought that I would have to play the castanets as part of the string quartet. And again, I've had a few mishaps because you learn as you go along. We did a performance at the Greenwich International String Quartet Festival last summer, I think it was, and my castanets had broken, so they went and got me the best available pair of castanets in London, and they were apparently worth quite a lot of money. And I got a bit carried away, and part of the castanet flew off. I saw it in slow motion, and it ended up over there, and I just had to carry on regardless. But yes, so I have to pick these up in the last movement. And
I'm not sure why you played that. The tradition of the Fandango is, I was reading about it, is for couples to dance to and someone to play the castanet. So we've got the couples to do that.
yeah, so great.
So Craig really...
My hands were busy at that time.
Actually, it says in my part, and she says in the first violin part, that you can, from figure L, I can start playing the castanets as I wish.
But yes, you have all these notes to play.
At the same time, I'm supposed to be playing a lot of stuff. And it so happens that the cello is free at that moment.
I don't have anything marked in my part, I just have bars rest, so I think the natural thing, and I used to actually just do it on my leg, and then eventually, because we were doing it so much, I thought maybe I should splash out on some castanets.
Christmas present, was it?
Yeah. But I wonder if Boccerhini would have, they would probably, I mean, the tradition that you can see some wonderful performances on YouTube where they have a proper castanet person doing the dance and doing the rattles, and it's extraordinary actually. It's worth a listen. As in, if anyone here is a Boccerhini fan, I know that Julius Berger, the German cellist, he actually plays on what is thought to be Boccherini's Stradivarius. Boccherini apparently played on a Strad, and Julius Berger did a recording of the complete Boccherini cello concertos using this instrument, which is actually a really wonderful thing, because you can imagine that sound would have been the authentic sound that Boccherini himself would have been playing on. So I just thought I'd mention that for those interested.
Should we all get ready?
Yeah, but can we just say a big thank you to Craig for joining us today?
It's a pleasure.
It's always a delight.